The communal living in the square was supported by the much larger virtual community active on the internet through Facebook and Twitter, and by alternative and international media coverage. So this is the communal function. The educational function of the square was to actually educate the people on both the moral and political levels and change the social stigma of or panic from acts of revolt. Yesterday, Bill Ashcroft was talking about the difference between revolt and revolvement. And I think that in the French Revolution, it was actually coined by the French Revolution, this idea of revolution rather than revolt. Maurice and Cross, in their Dictionary of Utopianism, remind us that inherent within Utopianism is the idea that by means of rational and/or moral education, a fundamental and total change in a society's laws, customs, and mores, an improved state, society, or societal subgroupings can and should be brought into being, whether through gradual or dramatic change or by fixed and inherent stages of development. End of quote. The square also invaded the virtual cyberspace and flooded the internet with images, quotes, news, statements, interviews, media reports, propaganda, and counter-propaganda. The internet offered an opportunity to contemplate and measure the success or the failure of revolutionary groups, the positive and the negative outcomes of the revolution while it happens, the rise and the decline of hope among its supporters and its opponents. Internet brought about the value of solidarity and fulfilled an educational function within the utopian project. The fourth function would be the secularization function. The square strived to build a secular utopian space where class-based, gender-based, as well as religious-based relationships were briefly discarded in favor of the call for national unity and the much-needed separation between political activism and religious institutions. The secular utopian project, which prompted the revolution, did not reject religiously inscribed groups and agendas. To the contrary, it embraced all those who supported the demands for real justice and the necessity of true change. On the other hand, the religious utopian project during the first episode seemed to have united with the larger utopian community, especially after the Battle of the Camp. The deep cleavages between both projects developed throughout the year and became impossible to breach. This was particularly obvious on the commemoration day. The hidden face of the religious utopian project was revealed and claimed. For the Muslim Brothers constituency, establishing the Islamic Caliphate, for example, is clearly a desired utopia. On the other side of the cliff, the revolutionary groups denounce the dystopian project of the Muslim Brothers and their supporters, SCAF and the Salafists in particular. Those are the images collected online to show you how, throughout the year 2011, after the fall of Mubarak, this idea of resisting the military and the Muslim Brothers as being one and the same hegemonic position circulated very, very widely on the internet. The call for demonstrations to commemorate the revolution by the revolutionary groups was actually utopian in nature. We want to go back to the square to fight, not Mubarak's regime this time, but SCAF and the military regime supported by him. Of course, I can go on and try to analyze each one of those images and graphics and cartoons and so on. It's rich of meaning, but at the same time, I just wanted to refer to elements such as these, for instance. This is the image which was very, very popular online for quite some time. And it says, the eyes of freedom. Those are the eyes of freedom, actually. We, sacrificed one eye, but we're willing to sacrifice the other eye in the process of liberation. And of course, the role of women in the uprising was demonstrated time and again online. I'll show you some other images of the same day. So this is the second episode on the 25th of January. And here it says, the square's legitimacy is made by what? By the revolution and by the parliament. Of course, this was claimed by those who won strategic positions in the parliament. And they wanted to draw the legitimacy from the square and put it on, force it on somehow the population by saying, now that we have elected democratic parliament, we should sip it. Which is anti-democratic, you know, like some of those evident, you know, reflections, I don't have to go back and make any claims about them. Here you see protesters who remember that the Muslim Brothers were the allies of Mubarak. So the same day, this was the cover of one of the magazines in 2005, during the first presidential elections, democratic presidential elections that we had in Egypt in 2005. And the cover of this magazine shows the leader of the Muslim Brothers saying, we support Mubarak, right? So, allow me now to move to the dystopian functions, or how the square was encoded and decoded in dystopian terms. Najid Yar, in his discussion of the virtual utopias and dystopias and the cultural imaginary of the internet, writes, the utopian is above all a sensibility, a way in which human culture understands itself and interprets and evaluates lived experience in its ambiguities and aporia. How does the utopian sensibility transform into a dystopian, dehumanizing project? The fine line between both is a matter of perception. Three major features of this utopian sensibility are defined by the author. The extrapolative quality of the world, defined by utopian thinking. The normative core, according to which utopia is not an unreal place, but rather a place to be desired. And third, the disjunctive quality of the utopian spaces in rupture with the lived reality that defines them. Dystopia is the essentialization of these features, following a normative regime of thinking. Dystopia is the authoritarian, transcendental form of utopia, which is therefore the triumph of the past over extrapolation. It is the place to be desired, not on earth, but rather in the afterworld. A dystopian society is, by definition, a would-be perfect society that is, in fact, a very bad, unfavorable, or faulty place. The Liberation Square was portrayed as a bad or faulty place by anti-revolutionary groups under Mubarak during the first episode. It has become a dystopian place thanks to efforts to overemphasize the capacity of the religious transcendental utopian project and to wipe down and challenge the legitimacy of all other utopian projects. The square as a site of enchantment and glorification of the Nietzschean will to power was hiding another face, the face of disenchantment and defeat, ready to be used, like a mask of bitterness or a counsel of despair. The dystopian functions of the square turned it into an unfavorable place for liberation and dissidence by calling upon the protesters to go back home. At least 3 dystopian functions were bestowed upon the square. The first one is a very long statement. I couldn't find one word to describe this function, in my opinion. It's the dystopian function of being wise and moderate rather than becoming radical and revolutionary. So go back home, be wise. The very idea of protesting and demonstrating was demonized as soon as Mubarak stepped down. It was portrayed by SCAF and supported by the Muslim Brothers as unworkable in practice, using the rhetoric of the old regime. TV viewers were mobilized against protesters because they allegedly broke the wheel of production. It makes people laugh because they know exactly what was broken during that time. So, broke the wheel of production. Protesters were told to go home and to respect the new legitimacy, replacing the legitimacy of the square. The new legitimacy which was brought about by democratic elections. Revolt was portrayed through state media and in several announcements used by SCAF as a step in order to get rid of the regime and establish a new one without any guarantee that the old one is really dismantled and that the new one is radically different in practice and in principle. The protesters and practitioners of the civil society were portrayed according to this new order as destructive groups that should be destroyed. Moreover, revolutionaries were allegedly manipulated by external powers, which, by the way, were never unmasked, never identified, never caught in action, and never put to trial. The dystopian function of menace, this is the second function of dystopia, to threaten. SCAF emphasized the apocalyptic dimension of occupying the square, insisting on the fact that SCAF and the military are the sole guarantor of stability and security. On the other hand, the Islamist groups accused the protesters of moral decline, referring, for example, to mingling of young men and women, drugs, suspicious sources of funding, etc., etc. They positioned themselves as the sole guarantor of morality and the unique revolutionary forces capable of protecting the square and mobilizing large numbers of the population. They went on accusing the persistent revolutionary groups, because they were not yet organized in parties and associations, of being the ones who shattered the strength of the revolution. The third element, or the third function of the dystopian representation of the square, the unlearning function, versus the educational function of utopia. Dystopia aims to wipe down memory and to unlearn revolution. The square under the Islamist rule functions sometimes as a nameless place in search for a better name. A few suggested to change the name of the square, as I said earlier, to the Square of the Martyrs. With all good intentions, the suggestion, at best, connotes total indifference to history and to the idea of liberation for that matter. And at worst, it promotes instinct of death and distress rather than the instinct of life and joy. Ironically, a few weeks ago, the graffiti of the martyrs, another important symbol of the revolution, were wiped off the walls of Muhammad Mahmoud's street at night. Fantastic work of art were completely destroyed this way, and the destruction continues actually. Protected by the police. Graffiti artists contributed immensely to the imaginaries of the revolution. Images of their work widely circulated online and supplied the secular utopian project with visual tools for contestation and a constant reminder of the martyrs and their families' dashed rights. Those are new graffiti. You can see here a direct critique to the Muslim Brothers, for instance, and those are the old ones of martyrs and mothers. I would like to end this section with a proposition. I would like to propose a reading of the square utopian and dystopian functions in other terms, as an other space. Michel Foucault's article of Other Spaces, published in '67, suggests that we are in the epoch of simultaneity. Okay. We are in the epoch of juxtaposition, of the near and far, of the side-by-side, of the dispersed. End of quotation. I suggest, I'm trying to point an idea, the idea of becoming Midan, of becoming square. Not in a bad sense. A square, Becoming Midan is better. The becoming Midan produces a heterotopian site for liberation, simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted, to use Michel Foucault's words. According to Foucault, the heterotopia is capable of juxtaposing in a single place, in a single real place, several spaces, several sites that are in themselves incompatible. Like the movie theater or the Persian garden, the Midan has become home for the protesters and the participants in the successive sit-ins, a metaphor of continuing rebellion, a space for debate and free dialogue, and a battlefield where confrontations between demonstrators and state repressive forces result in thousands of dead and wounded people. Like the mirror, Liberation Square reflects images of the revolution. And like the images reflected in the square's virtual mirror, the square becomes a site which is real and unreal at once, immanent and abstract at the same time. A space where juxtaposition and contiguity, as opposed to hierarchy and confrontation, becomes the rule and the key for participatory secular democracy. Whatever the future may hold in store for the Egyptians, the heterotopian representation of the square as a site of contiguity informs, in my opinion, the politics of hope as well as the politics of dissonance. If the first can be disappointed, the latter should always be claimed with joy and determination. Thank you so much.